Hello and welcome to our webinar, Discover YA Debuts. I'm Maggie Reagan, Books for You Senior Editor at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. A link to today's slide presentation was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download it, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download the slides by copying the URL on this screen into your web browser. If you have any trouble, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all questions, all tech-related questions, and we will pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Finally, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Setting. We have a wonderful event planned for you today, and we'll be hearing from these amazing authors a little later in the program. But first up, I'd like to introduce Danielle Presley, Marketing Associate from Penguin Young Readers, who is going to share a few upcoming titles with you all. Take it away, Danielle.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us here. I just wanted to quickly go through some of our debut titles, in addition to the ones that you'll be hearing from our amazing authors later. So first off, we have Nightbirds by KJ Armstrong. It's about 3 young women, each with a magical gift that they can bestow with just a kiss, and they're called Nightbirds. With these valuable gifts, the girls are treasured and protected by great houses who keep the secret of their magic hidden, making use of them for themselves despite there being a prohibition on magic. The Nightbirds are given every luxury and expected to marry great house lords and bear the next generation of Nightbirds. These girls are little more than birds in a gilded cage, but they're about to break free. The plotting is tense, exciting, and unexpected, and female empowerment is the beating heart of this book. Next up is Made of Stars by Jenna Voris. The quick pitch of this is Bonnie and Clyde set in space, but with a whole cast of renegades straight from Firefly and a Starship's Troopers-style uptight military grad who gets caught in the middle of the battle between these 2 outlaws and the regime he works for. I promise you're not going to be able to stop reading until you race to the end. Told in 3 alternating perspectives, Made of Stars knows how to grab you and never let go. The fight scenes are bloody, the stakes are life and death, and the chemistry is steamy. That killer combo makes it as accessible for well-seasoned sci-fi fans as for readers who love a good romance, full of snarky banter and broody yearning. And then the last title that I have for you is Viva Lola Espinosa by Ella Cerón. Despite her best efforts, when our straight-A student Lola gets a C in Spanish, her parents decide to take drastic action and send Lola to live with her abuela in Mexico City for the summer in order to learn the language. But while there, Lola discovers a shocking family secret. Her abuela believes the women in her family have been cursed, specifically to have their love lead into tragedy. So obviously, Lola spends her summer learning Spanish while at the same time juggling the affections of 2 cute boys because you might as well test this curse, right? The escapist romantic fun of Emily in Paris meets the comedic hilarity of Booksmart in this YA debut novel. And then my last slide, you can find out more about these titles that I just went through, as well as samplers and author videos at penguinydebuts.com. I'll be updating the site at the end of this month with our new season of titles, and we keep an archive of samplers and videos from our debut titles from earlier seasons, and you can find that at the bottom of the site. Also, we are doing a galley giveaway of the 3 titles you will be hearing about later in the webinar. You can either pull out your phone and scan the QR code here, or go to the link at the bottom of the screen to enter for a chance to win a set of the 3 titles. The link will also be included in the follow-up, so don't worry if you miss it here. And if you see this link and you say, oh, there's an E missing after the V in giveaway, that's not a mistake. That is for sure how that link is supposed to look. And that's it for me. So I'm going to turn it over to Maggie and our panelists.
Thank you so much, Danielle. We're now going to hear a brief introduction from each author about their book, and then we'll move on to the panel portion of the webinar. So first up, we have Mae Coyiuto. Mae is a Chinese-Filipino writer born and raised in the Philippines. She earned her BA in psychology from Pomona College and her master's degree in writing for young adults and children from the New School. If she's not writing, she's usually fangirling over Beyonce, tennis, Gilmore Girls, or all of the above. And she currently lives in Manila. Thank you so much for being here today, Mae. And Mae, I believe you are still muted if you're speaking.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So excited to be here. Oh, gotcha. I'll just have some slides to show you all. Wait a minute. Cool. So thanks again so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with Krystal and Lila, especially. I'm so excited for their books as well. And I guess I'll just do a brief intro of what Chloe and the KAISHAO Boys is about. So it's Chloe and the KAISHAO Boys is basically a YA rom-com set in Manila, Philippines. So it stars Chloe, who's a Chinese Filipino girl who basically gets set up by her aunt and her dad in a marathon of arranged dates in order to convince her to stay home close to college instead of going to her dream school in the US. And these are basically everything you can expect from the book. I'm not great at doing graphics, so just wanted to show off, like I'm kind of figuring out how Canva works. And there's like a great cover done by Alex Cabal and Jessica Jenkins as well. And I guess just a brief overview of what KAISHAO is. I'm not like an expert in any way, but these are mostly just from my research and like what I've experienced also with the Chinese Filipino community. So KAISHAO is a Hokkien term. So Hokkien is a language that's spoken by a lot of Chinese Filipinos in the Philippines. And it's basically means to introduce when you translate into English. And decades ago, it was way more formal where Chinese Filipinos would approach like a matchmaker to find like a suitable partner for their kid. And it's kind of similar to like what you kind of see in other media about like arranged marriages. But these days it's way less formal. It's mostly when a friend, a parent introduces like single people to potential partners, and there's no pressure to marry them or to even like them in a romantic sense. So it's basically just like kind of setting up people. And I was editing Chloe and the KAISHAO Boys a lot over the pandemic, so during the lockdown, and a lot of KAISHAO Facebook groups, dating sites popped up during that time. And I just found it really funny because like a lot of people were like, when they saw the announcement, they were saying like, oh, did you get inspired by these online groups? And I feel like the new generation just finds like a lot of new ways to incorporate the traditions from before. And so when I was coming up with the concept for Chloe and the KAISHAO Boys, so KAISHAO usually happens when people are in their 20s or 30s. So typically like the stereotypically marrying age as people would see it. And when I wanted to come up with like a concept for a book, I just thought that would be really fun and also awkward if someone just out of high school started getting involved in this whole KAISHAO scene. And yeah, I'm just really glad that I feel like in recent years we're opening up to more stories set in other countries and starring characters that we previously haven't seen represented in the media. And when I set out to write a story also set in Manila, I wanted it to be really fun and full of love and joy. This is a very light rom-com, and I really wanted that for a story set in the Philippines because I feel like the country hasn't been represented in that way in a lot of stories worldwide. Yeah, that's pretty much it for me. And thanks again, and hope you all like it once you get to read it. I'll just...
Great, thank you so much, Mae. Next up, we have Lila Riesen. Lila is the daughter of Afghan and Australian immigrants, was raised in the USA. Her undergraduate studies were completed at Indiana University and the Australian National University in English. In 2017, Lila graduated with a master's degree in English literature and linguistics from the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Free Radicals is her first novel, inspired by her cashew-coveting Baba and all the Afghans fighting for peace in the US and abroad. Thank you so much for joining us, Lila.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I'll tell you a little bit about what my book is about. So Free Radicals is a young adult contemporary book. It's basically where 16-year-old Mafi Shaheen, she moonlights as ghost of her high school, Santa Margarita North. And she's basically an undercover vigilante, and she takes out revenge on behalf of classmates who leave notes in the fairy tree behind the school, basically detailing transgressions of their fellow classmates and rumors they've heard. And so Mafi is the one that sort of decides whether or not it's fact or fiction and whether or not she should act on it undercover. But as her sophomore year progresses and she develops new friendships, including one with her childhood crush and the brother's best friend, she realizes that her hidden identity and the secrets that she's keeping go far beyond just being the ghost. They bleed into her home life with the complex dynamics that she has with her Afghan-American family. Her dad is Afghan, her mom is white and American. Then she has her siblings, Rafi and Kate, and also dealing with the family members that are trying to or forced to flee Afghanistan as well. So what inspired me to write this book? So my Baba, who is basically my grandfather. Baba in Farsi usually means father, but Baba was the father of fathers. He was basically in control, the head of the whole family. And he passed away over 10 years ago. And I wrote this book during COVID-19. And I think for a lot of people, COVID gave people license to think introspectively about their lives and their upbringing and what has brought them to this point where they're staring at a computer screen and shut out from the outside world. So I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, and even though it's known as notoriously open-minded in a college town, after 9/11, I could tell my classmates were looking at my family differently. And my crush that I had even, joked around that my dad is a terrorist. And, those things leave scars, not only with myself, but, in my family. So I saw, my dad desperately trying to fit in. And so through the years, my Baba and my dad both told me stories about their closed-minded encounters with strangers. And I wanted to write a story that would be universal and funny, and that could expose some of these prejudices that are still ingrained in society, especially when it comes to South Asian culture and Afghans. And I wanted to write the book that I needed as a teenager. And I'll talk more soon about this, but thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Lila. And now we'll move on to Krystal Marquis. Krystal happily spends most of her time in libraries and used bookstores. She studied biology at Boston College and University of Connecticut and now works as an environmental health and safety manager for the world's biggest bookseller. A lifelong reader, Krystal began researching and writing on a dare to complete the NaNoWriMo challenge, resulting in the first partial draft of the Davenports. When not writing or planning trips to the book barn to discover her next favorite romance, Krystal enjoys hiking, expanding her shoe collection, and plotting ways to create her own Jurassic Park. Take it away, Krystal.
Hello, everyone. My name is Krystal, and I'm here to talk about the Davenports. I'm really excited to read Mae and Lila's book, so I'm very excited to be on this panel. I wrote the Davenports after seeing a picture of Frederick Davenport with an automobile. The article talked about his father, C.R. Patterson, who built a business after escaping enslavement. He found work as a blacksmith in a carriage company, and he partnered with J.P. Lowe to create his own business. It was highly successful and created about 28 different types of horse-drawn carriages and buggies. And after about 20 years, he was able to buy out his partner, and he renamed the company C.R. Patterson's and Sons. And it was a successful business in Ohio, and he passed it down to his son and later his grandson. But it was his son, Frederick, that transitioned it to an automobile company. And I remember reading in that article, it was the first and only Black-owned automobile company. And I was just floored that I had not heard this story before. I'm someone who tinkers with cars with my dad. I have a older Mustang that we try to fix up every once in a while. It runs for a bit before it quits on me. But it's something that I enjoy and was very interested in. And it was a later article in my own digging around, trying to find out more about this family, that I saw that he had 3 daughters. Their names were Dorothea, Mary, and Kate. And beyond that, I really didn't see any other information about them. And I got very curious about what their lives were like. They grew up with wealth, with privilege, and they grew up also in a time where the country was transitioning from the Reconstruction era and before Jim Crow legislature started to move its way from the southern states north and taking away some of those rights, privileges, and opportunities that Black Americans were taking advantage of at that time. My novel, The Davenports, takes place in Chicago in 1910, and it follows around the 2 Davenport daughters, Olivia and Helen, Olivia's best friend, Ruby, and then their family maid, Amy Rose. Olivia, as the oldest daughter, she very much is following the path that her parents set out for her. She recognizes her family's privilege, and she wants to continue that and find a good match, someone who can continue her family's legacy. For Helen, on the other hand, she, as the youngest, takes advantage of her parents' preoccupation with getting Olivia a good match, and her older brother, John, who's being groomed to take over the family business. So she, being close with her brother, takes a lot of liberties with that, and she joins him in the garage, learns to fix carriages and work on the Model T that he brings home for them to experiment on. Their family friend, Amy Rose, has a crush on John, but she's keeping that secret, as well as her secret dream to become a salon owner and create her own company, creating a hair care line for Black women. And Ruby, who is Olivia's best friend, she also has a crush on John, and she is balancing her parents' expectations to find a good match, just like her best friend, but then also falling for a newcomer in town who kind of piqued her interest. So these 4 young women over the course of the novel, trying to find good matches and follow the expectations of their family, kind of learn a lot about who they are, what they want to be when they quote unquote grow up, and what they expect from the world around them. This novel is the type of representation that I wish I had as a young reader. Stories about Black success and entrepreneurship during a time that isn't really talked about in history classes. I know I didn't come across them in school. So it was very interesting to do this research and tell these young women's story. And I'm really, really happy that it's out there and people can read it. And I'm very thankful to be on this panel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Krystal, and thank you, everyone. We're now moving on to the panel portion of our webinar. So, Krystal, you can stay up, and I will invite all of our author guests to please turn their videos back on. Welcome on to. Okay, so I'm going to kick this off. I have an individual question for each of you to kind of set the scene, and then we'll move into some group questions. And there's a couple of questions from the audience in already. So if we have some time, we can address those. And if we don't, we'll send them all to you after the webinar, as we mentioned at the beginning, and you'll have time to address them on your own after the webinar has concluded. So Krystal, we'll start with you, since you're all warmed up. I'll say I've seen the Davenports compared to Bridgerton a few times because that's just in the air. But I know where the Bridgerton TV show kind of inserted people of color into a historical narrative and then didn't deal too much with how they would be received. You, as you've just told us about, you've unburied a piece of kind of forgotten and little discussed history about a real family that lived and loved despite really significant odds. So I'm curious to hear some more about the challenges that you faced as you turned this very real family into a fictional one. And I want to know what of that reality was the most important for you to preserve in your narrative.
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges I faced, which now that I think on it kind of worked in my advantage, was the lack of information that I had on the family. It really allowed me to write the type of story I wanted and introduce other elements like political element, the love triangle, which now I'm getting feedback that's quadrangle with all the different couples that are mixing it up. And it really allowed me to turn my imagination loose and work on the story on how I wanted to tell it. It allowed me also to highlight Black society and push gender norms. Like I mentioned, Helen is very close to her brother John, and she tinkers on the carriages and the automobile that he brings home. So like having that kind of leeway to pull in elements that really interested me helped. And it was really important for me to include the social awareness that was going on. For Olivia's character, she's been very sheltered. So introducing her to what maybe Black Americans who weren't in her place of privilege were experiencing allowed me to bring readers on that journey with her. And as she learns to push for equality and the impact of Jim Crow, it's not all from her perspective. She can kind of interact with other characters too. So it was really important for me to be able to take readers on that journey with her.
I'm gonna move backwards through presentation order here and move on to you, Lila. Because I want to talk about the title of your book a little bit more, because I know it's something that comes up in the narrative a couple of times. It refers to both radical change makers in history and to a concept in chemistry that you explain in the narrative, which is an unstable and reactive molecule that can kind of damage the body. And as a vigilante in her school, Mafi is kind of constantly walking that line between helping the people around her and hurting them, and also between like seeking help and being hurt by the people around her. So I would love to hear more from you about the process of titling the book, what kind of story elements came first to you as you were putting this together, and ultimately what kind of radical you think Mafi is, and if she is more one or the other.
Sure, what a great question. So yeah, in the book Free Radicals, I play with the science term free radicals and radicals in general, the term. And for me, radicals are those who think outside the box. They don't go along with what everyone else is doing all the time. For example, if we think about the suffragettes, and at the time, many of them thought them destructive of the social order. And some might argue that universal health care right now is a radical idea, and others a human right. So there's always this play of, good and bad, depending on who you ask. So in my mind, radicalism, being a positive agent for change, is the only path toward freedom for Mafi. So Mafi is definitely a flawed character. She's not a cardboard character. She does some not so great things and makes some questionable decisions in her formative years, as we all do, and as I definitely did. Sometimes I wonder how I'm still alive, but here I am. I think her heart is in the right place, though, and she's receptive to change and constructive criticism where it counts. So this is important. And at the end of the book, Mafi and her brother Rafi, they must think for themselves and go against what family members have perhaps set out for them and the rules that they have placed on them. And instead of doing what their parents think that they should do, they're doing what they think they should do, in basically in helping to locate their family who are forced to flee Afghanistan and are missing. So Mafi, you know, she doesn't know if she's helping or hurting by trying to look for them and to make this, broadcast this on a bigger global level. But she can't also sit in silence any longer. And so I think this is something that a lot of Afghan Americans are grappling with at this point in time. I know my family does. And the thing about radicalism here is that, just like with the suffragette example, not everyone is going to agree that Mafi and her brother's radical action was a good idea or a safe idea. But I think at the end, Mafi's finally living her truth, and she's being her authentic self. She's emancipated from what other people think of her. And because of that, she's free from the mental prison that she's actually placed herself in. So whether or not she's, you know, a good radical or bad radical is going to be up to the reader for sure.
Great. And Mae, so I think Chloe is also somebody who's sort of really on the cusp of change and going through a really transformative period. At the start of your book, she's preparing to leave her native Philippines for her dream university animation program in California. And she ends up being torn between romantic love, this love she has for her family, and then the love she has for herself and for her own dreams. And I know that she feels that some of the choices she has before her feel more selfish than others. So I'm wondering, while you were writing, did you kind of always know the direction you wanted her story to go? And then from your perspective, is there a wrong choice for her to make? And is wanting a different life than like the one your parents or your family wants for you, is that a selfish thing?
That's such a great question. I think so. Chloe, the manuscript went through so many rewrites and like took off a lot of chapters, but the one thing that stayed the same throughout, like the first draft to like what the book is now, was the ending. So I guess like I kind of always knew where Chloe would end up at the end of the book. In terms of her dreams, their conflict in her family. So just a background. So Chloe, like her dream is to go to USC and study animation there. But her whole family is based in Manila, and their ideal route for Chloe would be to study in a business school here and in Manila, and then also work for the family business that they manufacture, like denim. So I think it's, in terms of being selfish, I think it weighs a lot on Chloe. I think that's why she's so guilty about like her dreams being different from her family so much in the earlier parts of the book. And I think it's more, I'm not sure if it's more of like a question of being selfish or not, but I think it's a lot to do with like a lot of cultural and generational factors as well. Because I think if you come from a culture that's collectivist, that means like family and community is everything, whenever you think for yourself or put yourself first at times, I think it always feels like you're going against something or like you're doing something wrong. And I think like, and even her dreams of going abroad for college, like she doesn't have to do it. It's more of like a dream for herself. It might be hard to understand for relatives who had to migrate to the Philippines out of like necessity or like to have like a really better life for their future family. So instead of painting something as right or wrong, I think I wanted Chloe and her family to kind of just see like where both sides are coming from. And I think that's like the arc of the whole book is kind of like seeing like Chloe, not seeing Chloe as selfish, but more of like her dreams might be different from ours. And also Chloe seeing where her family's coming from and not seeing them as like the bad guys in her life, if that makes sense.
Well, I have some questions I'm going to throw out to all of you now. I know a group question on Zoom is super weird. When we're not all in the room together, it can be weird knowing when to speak. So if you need me to give you a speaking order at any point, I will, but I'm just going to toss it out, and feel free to unmute and speak as the spirit moves you, and we will figure it out. But there's something I would just want to start off with, because this was something that I felt was super present in all of your books as I was reading them, which is just that I know in each of your books, even though they're set in like different places in the world and at different points in time, I feel like all of your characters really grapple with the idea versus the reality of America and what it is. And Chloe's family worries about her becoming too Americanized. While I know Mafi's dad really works overtime to assimilate into like this new American lifestyle and has a lot of worries about it. Whereas, in 1910, the Davenports and their contemporaries are trying to really deal with this American class system that will like accept their wealth and not their race. And I'm hoping you can all speak as to how you approach these contrasting ideas of America in your book and how forefront that was in your mind.
I guess I'll go first. So for me, I tried to approach it in a matter-of-fact way. I didn't want to pretend that the colorism or racism didn't exist, and I wanted to present them in ways that were relatable. I don't think, for example, Olivia has an encounter really early in the story, and I don't think there's any person of color who hasn't experienced someone following them around in a store. So it was important to me to tell that from her perspective and address that. And I think that her knowledge of how her reaction would be perceived is really important and is definitely something people of color face and grapple with when they're out. So I really wanted to present it in an authentic way. And importantly, I didn't want to showcase it in a way that impacted the way she saw herself or her self-worth. She's still very proud of herself and her family and being Black in America. So I was really proud of being able to keep that value even in those tough situations.
Yeah, I guess for me too, I think being authentic with how I represented the characters really also meant a lot when I was writing this. And since Chloe was like, her dream is to go abroad to the US, basically, I think there's also a tendency with a lot of people here from other countries to kind of idealize like America a bit. And but I also wanted to make sure that the fact that she was leaving, that she wanted to leave the Philippines wasn't because she hated the Philippines. Like, I think I tried to make it really clear that she loved her home, but it was more like she just needed to like kind of discover who she is like outside of that as well. But yeah, I don't think it's, and when she gets criticized for being Americanized by like her relatives, I also kind of wanted to call out that like just because something's foreign doesn't mean it's bad as well. So kind of just like negotiating between those two things.
For me, Mafi, her dad, his whole thing is safety coming from Afghanistan because he had to leave in the middle of the night and when he was young. And he wants to fit in so desperately to keep basically Mafi and his the family safe. So Mafi's dad thinks that wearing clothes with American, the title like American Eagle, might help do that, and that eating pizza and hamburgers might help, and even converting to a different religion might help people receive him better as an American. So Mafi is seeing all this happen and then also trying to figure out who she is in the midst of all this. Mafi's dad put up the American flag after 9/11, just like my dad did, to show that others and neighbors that he is no threat, he belongs here. So I think belonging is a big theme in all of our books, and that, Mafi and her parents and her brother, her whole family, is trying to either, just basically to belong somewhere. And I think a lot of us in the US probably feel that way.
It actually really struck me how much all of these were inherently family stories at the end of the day too. I really loved the arc that the sibling relationships took in all of them. I guess with Chloe, it was that her relationship with her cousin Peter, but it really kind of mirrored a sibling relationship in a lot of ways. Because I thought each book kind of began with every character sort of distanced from the sibling they used to be close with in a way. And then over the course of the book, they sort of found their way back to each other and reconnected in a way that I just thought felt really natural and it was just really poignant. And can you all, I guess, speak a little bit more to the process of how you wrote these like sibling cousin relationships?
I'll just continue to go. So yeah, it was really a fun thing to write because the dynamics between my own brother and sister, you probably reflected a little bit in my book as well. I think also in many African American families, it is true that the firstborn son is cherished, and whether or not the family members realize they're doing this or not. So in my family, for example, my baba, my grandfather, the father of fathers, would always ask my brother, who was the oldest firstborn son, about his math classes or talk philosophy with him. And with me, I never got any questions. It was just like, oh, so blonde. And I think that Mafi feels something similar. So that strains her relationship with her older brother inherently. And he's this basketball hottie, at school, and he has a beautiful girlfriend, and he's got this basketball scholarship to IU. And when it comes to Mafi and her sister is definitely this frilly dress wearing gorgeous girl who, has these ideas also of who Mafi should be and projects these onto her. It's a little bit annoying. So once they all, have these deeper, harder talks and not the superficial jabbing at each other, which I think a lot of siblings do, they realize, that profound love is there, and that if, they're stronger united than they are apart.
That's really funny because Peter, Chloe's cousin in my book, is also like the golden child of the whole family. So I grew up with so many siblings and cousins, but I think with my family, your cousins kind of are already like your siblings, and to the point where Chloe calls him Perfect Peter. And one of my favorite lines in the whole thing is, Peter to my family is what Beyonce is to everyone else. So that kind of sums up how they see him. And when Chloe starts out getting waitlisted from USC, and then once she gets waitlisted, her whole family just keeps on talking about how Peter got this scholarship to the best university in the Philippines. So it's kind of I feel like a lot of siblings and cousins, when they're growing up, because of this competition from current relatives or parents, they kind of see each other's rivals. But I don't know, I think it's really real that later in life, you start to really like the cousin that you once hated or the sibling that you once hated growing up, because no one really understands what it's like living with your parents, or I don't know, a matchmaking auntie, unlike your sibling or cousin. So I don't know, I guess it just came up because it just felt so real to what I feel like a lot of people experience as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the Davenport siblings, they do kind of start out in their own world. With the exception of Helen and John, they spend a lot of time together because they have that shared interest. But I think for the two sisters, Helen looks at Olivia as if she's the golden child and she's the perfect one. She's always helping out the mom and volunteering. And for Helen, she doesn't have any interest in shopping or not necessarily doing charity events, but getting dressed up and going to galas and balls. She'd rather be out in the garage with her brother and the other mechanics working. So I think as she falls in love for the first time, she turns to her sister for advice and guidance, and that really cements their relationship. And I think a lot of the banter that goes between the three of them is drawn from me and my siblings. I'm the oldest of four, so there's a lot of playful silliness that goes on, and also a lot of advice and support. So it was really nice to draw that into the story too.
There's a lot of seriousness in all of these stories, but there's also a lot of fun in all of them, and they're all inherently love stories. And I'm just curious to hear, what romantic tropes did you all most want to include for your readers, and what are your own personal favorite kinds of love stories?
I guess I'll go first since we're just going to do rotations. I didn't initially think is matchmaking a romantic trope. I guess it is, but I don't think I saw it as a trope before, but I had so much fun writing this matchmaking story. And I guess so the three guys she gets set up with, it's basically what if your auntie or dad sets you up with your best friend's brother, your best friend's boyfriend, and your high school crush. So I feel like I got to play around with so many different tropes with that. And for love stories as well, I think when I wrote this, I really wanted the romantic love to feel as strong as also the familial love that was in the book, because I feel like I don't know, when you're in high school, like I feel like family, especially like from like a Chinese Filipino community that I grew up, like parents and like my siblings and everything just like was such a big part of my life that like I feel like the love communicated there is as strong as like whatever swoon-worthy stuff you're also feeling outside of that. And I guess for my favorite love stories, I guess like after writing this, because all of the guys kind of have like a personal history with Chloe from the beginning, I realized I really like writing like friends to lovers type things. Like just like that slow burn and just like, yeah.
Yeah, so for my book, Mafi, I guess the trope here would be forbidden love on many different levels. So Mafi is head over heels for Jalen Thomas. He's a walking thirst trap. He's one of Rafi's, her brother Rafi's teammates, so he's automatically kind of out of bounds there. And she used to tag along with Rafi and Jalen as a kid, so it's kind of hard for her to like come out of her shell and become more than just her older brother's little sister, and have Jalen see her as perhaps something more. And Jalen's also a junior, and she's a sophomore. And I don't know if you guys remember way back when, but 1 year difference, 2 year difference. It's like, oh, you're dating an upperclassman. It's very scandalous. And in my case, when I was a teenage girl and I was told that I can't have someone, or someone was forbidden, that certain someone becomes suddenly 10 times more desirable. And I think the forbidden love interest in my book, even if it's one-sided for a while, it's an obstacle that keeps the readers, turning the pages and raises the stakes. We've also got in my book the enemies to lovers trope, just with Baba and the cat, because at first they kind of hate each other, but at the end they start to love each other. And I think it's important to show that, animals and people can also eventually start loving each other. And I personally love the fake relationship trope, like the one seen in To All the Boys, one of my favorite books. And seeing that relationship slowly develop is just like so cute. I love it.
The fake dating is one of my favorites too. I love fake dating tropes. I also really like the friends or rivals to lovers. Those are always fun. But one of my personal favorites is the love triangle, which, if anyone's read the Davenports already, has a lot of love triangles in it. So I like the idea of getting to know yourself by interacting with other people and developing relationships. And I think in the Davenports, the love triangles creates a lot of tension, but also gives the characters a lot of room to grow. They figure out who they are as people, what they want from relationships, what they want from another person who might be their partner, and how they want to be treated. And I think that's a really important part of coming of age and discovering your own identity, is what you look for in another person, what attracts you, and what's important to you when you're creating your own relationships and your little tribe of people. So yeah, that was really important for me, and it's a lot of fun to write. Will they, won't they, who are they going to pick? It's a lot of fun.
The love triangle gets a lot of hate, but I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I read something somewhere that they were like, it's because people misinterpret it as like you're torn between two people, but the reality of it is like you're choosing between who you think you should be and who you want to be, and that's like the crux of it. And that, which is what you do. So that's why it's so great. Ruby's storyline, I think, was my favorite in your book. So
She was a lot of fun.
yeah, it was great. One more little serious one, and then we'll pivot away, but that's something that appears in some way or shape in each one of your books, is like colorism or internalized racism, which is in the Davenports. It was most notable for Amy Rose, who was a point of view character, but also for her, one of Ruby's triangle points, Harrison, because they both have to deal with the implications of what being a light-skinned Black person meant in the early 1900s, and they're kind of excluded from both Black and white societies. And then Chloe talks about the Great Wall between Filipino and Chinese Filipinos in the dating world, which was something I had never heard of before and was really intense to read about. And then Mafi worries about her blonde hair and how it separates her from her brother, who's inherited more of their father's Afghan features. Yeah, and just being Afghan in a post 9/11 world. And I was curious why it's important for you all to include these elements in your stories.
For me, it was really important to include representation in many forms. Um, it was important to feature characters who had different backgrounds, different experiences, and that included Black Americans who are mixed race or light skinned. And I think for anyone who's read or seen the movie Passing, they know that it comes with different challenges. So I really wanted to include that in the story. And even though Amy Rose and Harrison are both mixed race and lighter skinned, they also come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So it was interesting to show how Amy Rose growing up adjacent to wealth and then having all this ambition, the obstacles that she faced, and those obstacles were different to what Harrison faced because he was wealthy, but he was still kind of like an outsider looking in when he wasn't in the groups that accepted him. So for me, representation was a really big part of including their storylines in the Davenports.
So for me, I think it is important to include this to sort of dash the stereotype that Afghans as a collective only have dark skin or only look a certain way. Afghans come in a wide variety of skin colors, and thanks to the extraordinary genetic diversity found in Afghanistan. Afghanistan itself was a quick history lesson, was at a very important crossroads back in the day, and it was a place where many other civilizations passed through and also put down their own roots, and was given the name graveyard of empires because of this. Alexander the Great conquered Persia and Afghanistan in, I think it was 330 BC, and many of his troops settled there. So you might find a lot of Afghans who have blonde or red hair, especially those from Nuristan. So I think people often can confuse ethnicity with heritage. And so I wanted it in my book, Mafi with her fair skin, who often finds herself as an outsider, even in her own family. I wanted to kind of show that it's okay for her to embrace her heritage, even if her ethnicity might not reflect that. And I thought maybe perhaps there are some other people out there who feel a similar way, maybe even an outsider in their own family where other people might look quite different from them. But my Afghan roots are there. I love my heritage, and I was happy to finally come in and write a book about it and celebrate it.
I guess for me, well, just context with like what the Great Wall is. It's basically a term coined by younger generations of Chinese Filipinos when their families don't allow them to date anyone who doesn't have Chinese heritage. So it can happen, like in the Philippines, it's happened a lot with among my circle where like someone who's Chinese Filipino falls in love with someone who's Filipino, so not even though they both grew up in the Philippines, and then their families will come in between them. And I feel like it's in other places, I feel like the Asian diaspora gets kind of like bunched up into just one thing that people don't usually realize that they're like, it's all these communities are different. And then these types of things like discrimination and stuff like that happens within these specific communities as well. And I guess when I wrote this, I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna write something that like tackles the Great Wall and says something about like what we're doing in this community. I think it was just kind of like just trying to be as authentic as I could be, because like if I'm gonna write something that covers a lot of like matchmaking and like the love lives of like Chinese Filipinos, I feel like there's something that happens in our community that like I feel like I should address as well. And I think with writing like a specific type of group or culture, it's important to also portray the good and also like kind of like the not so good stuff that happens as well. So
quick pause, because there are a lot of questions in the Q&A, Krystal, about your research process. people are wondering if you did interviews or what did you do when you were researching this book?
So when I did my research, I did a lot of internet hopping and article hopping, I would say. So I found the article on C.R. Patterson, and I followed that to another article about him. And then there was the Smithsonian one. And I realized that time period didn't have that much information. So then with the help of the great librarians at my local library, I got some great books that really dove into what life was like and how the country was changing. Like Reconstruction had ended a few years before, and there were Black Wall Streets all across the country and all these opportunities for Black Americans that weren't really spoken about, ones that I didn't learn about. And then there were the hardships and the riots and the massacres that followed. So I was looking at a time period where there was all this growth and opportunity, and knowing right around the corner that Jim Crow and a lot of Black codes were going to come in and kind of dash a lot of hopes and businesses and entrepreneurship. So a lot of my research was looking through the books pulled by librarians and articles that I found online. I based the story in Chicago because in that research, I saw that a lot of that growth and change was happening in Chicago. And fortunately, I was halfway through drafting the Davenports when the pandemic hit, and a lot of the Chicago Public Library was available online. So I was able to get into Chicago's history that way. And it was really much an adventure and a journey on its own, and one that was a lot of fun.
Also a lot of cover love in these comments, and some love for your sweatshirt, Lila.
Yeah.
So Krystal, your book is out already. You're coming up in the spring. You're all debuts. This is the debut webinar. How do you all plan to spend your pub day? Or Krystal, how did you spend yours?
So I spent mine, I went to brunch with my mom, and then I had a wonderful launch event where I had friends and family and coworkers come. It was really great to have their support. And there were also some other authors who were local to the area who came to wish me luck and give good advice. Some advice that I got that was really helpful was making sure that you plan out your day so that you're not sitting around waiting and like checking things and seeing like what's going on. You know, just treat it as a celebration. And then like we went out to dinner afterwards. So it was really nice.
For me, so my book comes out March 21st. So my husband and I like to do a lot of kind of out there things. Like we like to go shark diving and water crossing and do all these different things. And so I had actually planned a couple months ago for us to go to Switzerland and do our first skydive on my book drop and like go and hold my book while I was just to take my mind off it. Otherwise, I'm going to be refreshing all the time, like Krystal said. But then I found out that I was pregnant. We're expecting our first baby, so probably doing that at 8 months pregnant wouldn't be the best thing. So I'll probably just do something very nice and similar to Krystal. You know, go out to have some croissants and do all the nice things.
Yeah, first of all, well, congrats on the baby and also congrats on the book, Krystal. I guess for me, I'm based in the Philippines right now, but I'm super lucky because like I'm gonna visit some relatives in the US, so I'll actually be there when the book launches on March 7th, and I have like a small launch event planned at Book Soup, which is I think it's in West Hollywood with another writer, Raquel Marie. But yeah, and I just have I have a lot of family in the States, so it'll be just really nice to go see them again. And yeah, I think every milestone with the book, I tend to just listen to like my favorite music. So I feel like I'll just be listening to stuff the whole day.
Well, I've just close on one last question for you all, and that's just you've all written about a generation of teens that have different ideals, different dreams, just kind of different perspectives than their parents. And I'm wondering, what do you hope that teens who might be in similar situations today will take away from your books?
So I think it's so difficult, at least it was for me, while you're living it as a teen, to even fathom disappointing your parents. So I'm going to offer a radical idea here to the teenagers out there, to younger Lila, and say that the love of our families, we should covet and cherish it. It's a beautiful thing, but it's not everything. We shouldn't let it be a prison and let it dictate our lives and where we go in our lives and that inner spark that we have and who we authentically are. For me, I had this identity versus role confusion throughout my teenage years. So who I was and who I am now has stayed consistent, but the role that I was playing did not, it didn't fit with who I was and the role that my parents had cut out for me. So there's this like dichotomy of this good girl, people pleaser who would, go clean the house and cook dinner and put on Chopin to please others. But there was also this girl who hours later would be blasting rap in her car and climbing out the window to go meet friends in the park for no particular reason, just to sort of rebel. And so I think my biggest advice would be to be yourself and they'll adjust.
As someone who, like, my parents really loved that I liked books and writing growing up. But then when I said like, oh, I kind of want to pursue this professionally, they were just like, wait, that's too much. So I guess like as someone who had like kind of like unconventional dreams compared to like the people I grew up with and the family I had, I think I just hope that someone who also experiences the same thing kind of feels like they're not alone when they read this book, because like that would have helped me so much if I had something like this growing up. And I guess I also wanted to make sure that like this book doesn't make it seem like if you're different from your family doesn't mean that like your family, it's you versus your family for the rest of your life. I think in some scenarios, like if it's more of like a difference in generations and like what was culture back then and culture right now, I think it's more like I feel like I hope that families, I hope that teens and also like if their parents or like siblings read this book, I hope it would be more like them seeing it as like, how can we all work together, learn from one another, and maybe do better for like the future generations. And I guess as someone who always felt guilty of like thinking for myself, someone once told me that like, if you shove all your issues under the rug, that's also kind of like you shoving yourself under the rug. So I think for people who come from big families and also like cultures that make it seem like you're just supposed to be like a keg in like this whole system, I think it's also important to like acknowledge what you're feeling and also like your dreams matter as well. So
Yeah, I think along the line of what Lila and Mae said is that it is brave to choose something different from what your family or your parents want for you. Just to hold on to what makes you happy, what makes you passionate. And even though it's difficult and scary, that your dreams are valid and definitely worth pursuing, and to believe in yourself.
Well, Krystal, Lila, Mae, thank you so much for being here today. Congratulations on your debuts, and thank you again for that discussion. It was wonderful having you all with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
And thank you, Danielle, for the intro to all of those books today. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's title recording, presentation slides, and a certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Have you heard? Booklist Reader, our new book browsing guide offering reading recommendations to patrons of all ages, is available in print. Go to booklistonline.com to find out how you can order print copies for distribution at your library. If you already subscribe to Booklist, Booklist subscribers can share issues digitally for free. Visit our website for more details and to see examples of how libraries are sharing Booklist Reader with their patrons. What books did you fall in love with this year? What stories excited you so much that you couldn't wait to recommend them to your friends? Vote in our inaugural Booklist Blog Reader's Choice Awards to celebrate your favorite book cover, protagonist, villain, couple, and plot twist. Scan this QR code or head over to our website for details. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more huge thank you to our authors, Krystal, Mae, Lila, and to our sponsor, Penguin Young Readers. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.